Welcome to Extra Takes, hosted by Northland Church Senior Pastor Dr. Joshua Laxton. Join us each week as Pastor Josh reveals the rest of the story behind his sermons. We'll discuss how those who follow Christ can live out a biblical vision for the church in our world today.
Well, hello, Northland family and friends. Welcome to another episode of Extra Takes. Hey, I'm your co-host, PJ, along with Matt Shiles. We have had a wonderful, I would say, evening. You and I, we both have in some sense recovered from our somewhat jet lag in Ireland. And are you wearing green for Ireland?
Apparently.
I
just thought about it.
Okay.
It just happened. I do have my green mug.
Look at that.
My Ireland mug.
Ireland mug.
No, don't do that.
Arr.
You didn't do that over there.
I didn't.
You were too afraid.
I refrained from doing it. I didn't want to offend.
Mad at those Americans coming over.
I tell you, those Americans.
Well, we're going to get into the message today, but what was unique is, and we'll talk about this a little bit, but the message you preached through a video on Saturday and Sunday and then in person on Monday was the same message you preached in Dublin on Sunday. Yeah, so I got to hear it live, and it was pretty similar. What you gave, right? What you gave? Was pretty similar.
I changed the opening, made it more, kind of Ireland friendly, and I did change like one of the slides to kind of at least capture one of the things that we learned, because it's a little bit of a different culture in the sense of people are on a lot more people are on government assistance, and so I wanted to kind of hit that.
But that was fascinating to be in a different country, a different church, different context, but receiving the same message.
Yeah,
and it really transcended cultures, because the context of the church we were at, it has over 70 nations represented. So obviously Irish, but so many other nations represented. So really multicultural. But I got a sense that this type of message is not just gospel transcends culture, and it's not just focused on not just going to be relevant to us here in the United States, but really relevant for the nations.
Yeah.
So let's dig into it. We're in Genesis, making sense of mission, and this week it's Faith Fuels Faithful Mission, and it's all about complications, how we complicate mission. This is Genesis 16, 1 through 16, and this is the story talking about Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. It's March 7th through 9th. So the outline, you gave us three truths of this passage. To start, the main point was failing to exercise godly faith can complicate faithfully executing God's mission. And these three truths of this passage, first is when we exhibit fear over exercising faith, we cloud God's glory, God's kingdom, God's mission. Second is when we cast a cloud on God's glory, God's kingdom, and God's mission, there is a tendency for people in the world to become proud. And finally, number three, God overcomes the complications of mission by breaking through our cloudiness and the world's pride. And you really ended with a fascinating, heartfelt perspective of trying to put ourselves into Hagar's position, and really thinking about where Hagar was in that moment, and this idea of the Christophany, the pre-incarnate Jesus, going after her, and just a really, really beautiful thing. So to start with our questions, how about we do the old trusty question? The first one I like to start with is, can you give us one word for this week?
Complicate.
That's a good one. That's where you started out. Something fun about the introduction to the sermon in Ireland you threw up a picture. So our hosts, obviously there was Pastor John, who's the senior pastor of the church, but we also had John Paulo, who's from Venezuela, and we have Praveen, who's from India, and they were our hosts showing us all around Ireland. So you threw up a picture of them, and you said, we were getting Irish history from
a Venezuelan and an Indian. Yeah, a little confusing. Kind of complicate things about.
Complicate things.
Yeah,
adds an interesting perspective of learning the history.
Yeah,
which can be helpful, but also some of the history we're getting.
Yeah,
secondhand, right?
Yeah.
So that was a fun addition. We were on the train, and you just snapped a picture. There was a point where we were on the train, and he starts asking questions to them, very pointed, direct questions. I'm like, oh, I know what he's doing, because you had your iPad out, and you were you were planning that in the moment. So that was really fun to see. All right, so complicate is the word for the week. I like it. Talk about a takeaway from preaching this week, both in our context and also in Ireland.
Like a takeaway from the message that I had, or just a takeaway?
I would say either a takeaway from the message or just the process of delivering that message in both of these contexts.
Well, it's actually fascinating given what's happening in the Middle East, because I wasn't able. I mean, again, I'm only saying it in passing, but it's a very strong point in passing, where if you really want to know why there's so much chaos, so much violence, so much animosity and hatred and fighting historically in that region, this is the passage where it all began.
Yeah.
And then to really see where it began, because God's people failed to exercise faith. And yet God still, and this is what's so amazing, God still shows grace to the individual by whom will come the donkey of a man, Ishmael. And so that is a fast. I mean, that's a takeaway. But I mean, that wasn't. I mean, and here's the thing: that wasn't the point and the driving point of the passage. Like, again, this is why. Like, you can preach this passage in so many different ways, and I think you could, again, be true to the text. But what I'm trying to accomplish in this series is making sense of this mission that God started with Abraham. Now, again, God has always been on mission to create a people and then to redeem a people with Adam and Eve sinning. But then when you get to Genesis 10 and Genesis 11, you're starting to see something happen. There's the Table of Nations. Then in some scholars' estimation, which I would put myself in this camp, Genesis 11 is an understanding of how the Table of Nations came to be. Mm-hmm. And so now you have the world that has now been scattered because of their pride. And now God is going to redeem one of those worldly people just out of the blue. Yeah. And then he's going to use them to be the conduits of actually worldwide global blessing. And what I've wanted, and this is kind of the whole impetus of this series, is trying to chart the first family of mission so that you at least feel a little bit better about yourself.
Yeah.
Now it shouldn't give you a license to fail to exercise faith, because I can just promise you when we do that, it leads to nowhere good. I mean, just like here. But going back to your question about a takeaway, this is the conflict of the Middle East right here. Is the origin. And just to recap there, and I said it, is you have Abraham. Jews consider Abraham to be their father. Mm-hmm. Obviously Christians, because we are coming from that Jewish line, we see Abraham as our father. But the Muslims actually see Abraham as their father, but through Ishmael. So here, I mean, this is why this is so important to understand Abraham, but really in the context of mission. And so if you think about their failure to exercise faith actually has complicated mission even in that part of the world, because it's what we call the 1040 window. Yeah. It's where the least amount of Christians actually live now. It is a very hard window when I say to penetrate, and so these are all kind of these Muslim nations in the kind of the 1040 window: Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, so forth and so on, kind of around that. It's a latitude and longitude. Yeah. And today mission has been so complicated there, but here's what's fascinating too, and again, I don't have time to do all this, but what is God, when you look at the last point of how God's going to He's going to basically uncomplicate it, not necessarily through Abraham, but through his sovereignty and his power. And what we're actually seeing, what we have seen for decades now, is God's sovereignty and how He has overcome, the complications of missions by granting visions and dreams in those areas, where they wake up and they like, I saw this man with a white robe. His name is, I think, is Isha. I think that you would know. Isa. And so what we see is God, He's overcoming the complications and even overcoming the pride of Muslims. So God's going to accomplish His mission.
Yeah.
With or without our faithfulness.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good takeaway. So let's look at this first point, this first truth, and it's when we exhibit fear over exercising faith, we cloud God's glory, God's kingdom, and God's mission. So this idea of exercising faith over fear is this continuation from last week's final point, where you talked about faith over fear in the cultivation of mission. Now, you use this idea of God's glory, God's kingdom, and God's mission, repetitively over and over. Talk about how these three are in relation to each other.
Yeah, they're in. Yeah, I mean, I thought about, well, should I just do one? But I'm trying. Yeah. So this is the hard part: is like, what do you kind of just cut out and in some sense reduce? And I'm like, I just don't think we need to reduce it.
Okay.
Because they're all interrelated.
Yeah.
So obviously, I start out with God's mission. God is on mission to redeem a people from all peoples, to reflect His glory in all spheres of life, thereby bringing heaven to earth. Mm-hmm. Like that's His mission. And so the mission of redemption is really for God to bring heaven to earth. Because again, I want people to realize is that the end goal is not us floating away to heaven. Okay? Yeah. Heaven is actually the place where God resides. That's ultimately heaven, okay? And what we see at the very end is heaven, God's presence, God's throne, the new city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. And that's where you have the integration or the marriage between earth and heaven, the new city Jerusalem. And so that's where I want people to realize is you have God's mission, okay? Now, part of God, so the element of God's mission is that He's to redeem a people. Well, that's in essence kingdom. So God is on mission to redeem a kingdom. And so therefore that kingdom is attached to His glory, and His glory is attached to His nature, His characteristics, His attributes. And so they all are in relation to one another. God is on mission to bring about His kingdom here on planet Earth to actually reflect His glory in all realms of life. So they are so interconnected, which is part of the reason why, like, I wanted to just kind of leave them all up there in the cloud, the rain cloud, because if we're unfaithful, we're not participating in God's mission. And so therefore, if we're not really participating in God's mission of Him redeeming a people, then we're really not bringing God's kingdom to visibility and thus heaven on earth. And therefore, we're actually robbing God of the glory due His name. Yeah. So you are clouding God's glory, God's mission, and God's kingdom. You're doing all three.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In that, you talked about all realms of life, and you've been using that term quite a bit.
Yeah.
Is that interchangeable with spheres?
Yeah, I mean realms, spheres. Sometimes I just try to use different words in those, kind of in those settings because they are synonymous and interchangeable. Spheres, realms, areas, all areas of life. So, yeah.
Because you've used to use spheres a lot, and I've heard you use realms recently, and I didn't know if it was intentional or
It's just change. Yeah.
just trying to change it up.
Yeah.
Kind of like when
Redeem, realms. I could say salvation, spheres.
Okay.
But it's just all interchangeable.
Great. Under this first point, still, we see something from Abraham here that I think we also see from Adam, and is this passivity.
Yeah.
It's something that you've done a good job of really drawing out. I'd never seen before how passive Adam was, and as you were teaching through this passage, it really jumped out at me, and you made this point about Abraham being so passive.
Yeah.
So can you talk to us about this idea of what passivity looks like and what that means when we're really passive to what God is calling us to in His mission?
Yeah. So I would say passivity is the inactivity of God's people to do the right thing at the right time. So it's the inactivity of God's people to do the right thing at the right time. And so you have Abraham, and you obviously had Adam. The same thing is they are inactive. They're there, they are present, but they are inactive. There is this passivity to them where they're just letting things unfold, or they're just going with the flow, and so their inactiveness prevents them from doing the right thing at the right time, and as a result of their passivity, they actually allow chaos to be brought in, and so the wrong thing happens. And really does some damage to people. People actually get hurt. And so that's part of where, our passivity as men, as godly men, they do hurt. They hurt those that in some sense we love the most. And then they can hurt the people that become just collateral damage because of our passivity. So obviously the human race isn't a good example of that. Is the collateral damage is that sin spread now to the entire human race. The collateral damage here is, I would still say, the human race, but a particular region of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any other examples that jump off here
about passivity?
Mm-hmm. Biblical characters that we see
that are passive.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about. You're definitely going to have passivity in sometimes David's life.
Yeah.
Where so he's supposed to be at war.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And so he's late. He's not being at the right place at the right time. He's actually at the wrong place.
Yeah.
And so there's this passivity where he's being inactive to what he's called to do, the right thing at the right, kind of at the right time. So there's passivity there, and obviously the collateral damage is Uriah. Right. Collateral damage is even the kingdom, his own family. Yeah. It does seem like David was a very passive dad, was not a very active dad in his family's life. In fact, when you really study the life of David, he was probably a really, really horrible father. It's where you got Absalom, and then, I'm trying to remember his sister that was raped by another family member. Tamar, but anywho, so you got some passivity there in his life.
That's another good example.
Well, then then you just got the passivity of really the priesthood. Because here's the thing: when you study, this is what's so fascinating. When you study the Old Testament, you'll come across things like in I forget the exact chapter, but Josiah, or Ezra and Nehemiah, where, they haven't been practicing something that God clearly wrote in black and white for hundreds of years. Well, there's passivity. Leaders are not leading.
Right.
Another thing, now it's coming, a lot of things are coming to me now. Yeah. But with Joshua, there's actually a passivity to his developing other leaders. So Moses developed Joshua. Yeah. And was able to pass the baton. But what you actually see with Joshua, he literally passes the baton to no one. And so in Judges, you have now everybody's doing right in their own eyes because there is no leader that has been developed, that has risen up for Joshua, even though he's the one who's declaring, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Okay, great, but you rose no one up. And so there's so passivity can be in all realms of life. Right. And so, but what we're seeing with Abraham, there's the passivity, in his relationship with Sarah. He's not interjecting himself. Obviously, with Adam, there's passivity to Eve. Joshua, I think there is passivity in leadership. I think with David, there's this passivity in his vocation as a king. There's passivity in him being a father. So there definitely is passivity in the Old Testament.
Yeah, it's a theme that I never considered before.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating theme. I mean, obviously Adam jumped out at me, and now that you were rolling through all the others, there's so many other examples of
that. And one, you could probably explain in Galatians 2 where Paul he points out Peter's lack of integrity when Jewish believers came up from Jerusalem. Their presence led Peter to fail to do the right thing at the right time and continue to hang out with Gentiles. Mm-hmm. So there's this passiveness because he is insecure or he lacks the courage. So again, passivity is the inactivity, but there's reasons for, and that's where I'm explaining the reason, for unfaithfulness through exhibiting fear. That at some level you are afraid to do the right thing. You are afraid to exercise faith. And so maybe you're afraid to exercise faith because maybe you want to do what you just want to do. And so, but nevertheless, there's this exhibiting fear rather than exercising faith of what God has called you to do.
Yeah, that's helpful. So let's look at this second point, and that's when we cast a cloud on God's glory, God's kingdom, and God's mission. There's a tendency for people in the world to become proud. And here, this is where you laid out, Hagar's actions assume one or more of the following: that God is either weak, small, and not omnipotent. God isn't present, so he's distant. He doesn't care, he's selfish. Or he isn't real. It's something that is conjured up. And the principle that I want to talk about in this section is when God's people exhibit fear, clouding God's glory, we embolden unbelief in the world. And then an emboldened, unbelieving world is confused about God, complicates mission. Talk a little bit more about that point.
Yeah, and you could, again, when I'm using exhibiting fear, I am just basically talking about unfaithfulness.
Yeah.
That you're just being unfaithful. And so, so when God's people exhibit unfaithfulness, they embolden unbelief in the world. And again, that is you see this principle throughout. I talked about Joshua 7, 1 Samuel 17 with Goliath. I do think, this is interesting. Friedrich Nietzsche, he said, in truth, there was only one Christian, and he died on the cross. And so there's a statement, I don't know who to attribute this statement, but the single greatest cause of atheism in the world is those who profess Jesus with their mouth but deny him with their life. I mean, and so there's that. So the unfaithfulness actually emboldens unbelief, and that really is the history of Israel in the Old Testament. I mean, think about, when the kingdom splits, and then, years later the Assyrians come in and they conquer the northern kingdom, and then years later the Babylonians come in and conquer the southern kingdom. I mean, you just embolden. They feel like they can come in and conquer. Sure. And God had told Israel, like, if you are unfaithful, basically your tail's going to be conquered. Mm-hmm. And so, as a result, though, of the unfaithfulness, there is an embolden of the enemy. And we actually see that, and I didn't. I think I got to it in the actual in the actual recording. Because I did talk about some of the New Testament principles that that we do see there, but. Yeah. One of the things that Jesus talks about, Peter talks about, is to live such good lives among the pagans, though they accuse you of doing wrong, that they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day He visits or the day He returns. A couple of different translations there, but the idea is this: is that the world's already not going to like us. Jesus told us that. But so therefore there's always going to be these accusations against believers. But what Jesus is getting at is that we really are living such faithful lives in reflecting Jesus, reflecting His kingdom in our lives, that they have nothing to come against us anymore. Like we kind of diffuse their boldness, because there's nothing that they can, because we are literally exercising faith in Jesus, and God's going to use that faithfulness for really even their good, where there would be this transformation, that they would actually glorify God because they've seen the faithful deeds of, of God's people. And so Romans 2, Paul, he talks about that principle. Now, here's the thing, what's going on in Romans 2. Didn't have time to really set it up. So Paul, he's actually... he's actually making the argument that all have sinned. He's going to get to that point in Romans 3, that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So he's getting there, but he starts out by even telling Jews that, listen, you missed the mark. Like, just because you are God's chosen people does not mean that you've hit the mark. You've actually missed the mark too. And then he uses how God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. So what had happened is that, again, because of the unfaithfulness of Israel, you have the Gentiles, those who are non-Jews, other nations. They look at these weak people and go, they're nobodies. And as a result, I mean, think about it. So if the Jews are unfaithful, and then you have the pagan Gentiles that feel like they are superior to the Jews, and this is the way it operated back then, is that you had geographical gods. Yeah. You had regional gods. You had national deities that nations would worship. So if you have this little ethnic if you have this little ethnic people called the Jews who believe in monotheism, the worship of one God, but yet they are small, they are insignificant, they are weak, they are divided in terms of the north and south. They really don't, in some sense, know what they believe, and yet, and they are experiencing conquest and conquering by other nations. Other nations would just assume that your God's not that powerful. Yep. And that's what happens today. Like there was a book that was, actually it was written a couple of years ago, but it was based upon Barna research, where studies consistently show how people that are far from the Lord, that are not in church, not Christians, they view Christians as hypocritical, judgmental, anti-science, and politically obsessed. And so what we're doing is that we're emboldening their unbelief, because we're not giving them anything that is substantial that would actually even make them think that our faith is real.
Yeah. What's so beautiful is that obviously that's not the end of the story, and it's such an interesting progression of between these three truths, because the third truth then is about God overcoming.
Yeah, but I would just going back to, if you think about how it complicates. One of the things that I'm constantly thinking through is just how complicated the church has made mission today in America. We are fragmented. We are divided. We are divided even as the church. We're divided politically. And so we have people that leave the church because, people don't say what they want, or they don't politically side with the people or the philosophies or the policies that they want. That's not of God. Division is not of God. And then for people to say that, and then for people to make that about a courageous thing, in terms of, you're not courageous if you don't wade into these political, polarizing waters. No, I'm going to wade into the waters of Jesus, because he was already polarizing enough. Yeah. All right. And so you have a fragmented church. You have a carnal church in many regards. You have a weak church that does not sometimes struggles with being able to balance truth and grace. Because here's the thing: if you have all truth and no grace, you become legalistic. If you have all grace and no truth, you become this a big word, an antinomian, where it's like there's no law, just do whatever you want to do because there's grace. And so then that's cheap grace. So again, if you have truth and no grace, you're a legalist. If you have all grace, no truth, you are a cheap grace person, where you do whatever you want to do. And so I'm telling you, it's very complicated, which is part of the reason why I say the churches that can exhibit faithfulness over time, they're the ones that God's going to use, I truly believe, significantly over the long term. Because we're so divided. We're so divided. And that's where I don't think there's going to be any macro transformation that happens on a fully national, large scale, barring God's miraculous intervention. I think it's going to be more micro transformations based upon the faithfulness of God's people in a particular locale. Because we have so complicated mission.
Yeah. One of the big takeaways from last week and then from this week is all about regardless of all of that, God is going to accomplish his mission.
And he's going to accomplish, yes. And that's what, and again, that's what it should bring everybody like this peace, this solace that, hey, I can't mess it up. Like, now here's it. Can I complicate it? Psst, I can complicate it.
Right.
But I can't mess God's will up. God's going to accomplish his will in the world. He's going to accomplish redemption in people's lives, regardless of how complicated I make it. God can work through, over, under our complications, and he can bust through the pride of the world. So that's why, like, maybe even some of you, parents, maybe you're listening to this, and maybe you feel like you blew it as a parent because you straddled the fence. You try to be a Christian, but you did, and then maybe you ended up hurting your kid, or maybe you were very legalistic and religious, but not very gracious and relational, or having that relational, gracious side of the gospel. And so you hurt your kid and they're far from the Lord today. I want you to know God can break through their pride, and God can overcome what you complicated. So just rest assured God is going to do. And that goes back to the unconditional nature of the covenant. that God is going to redeem one people from every tribe, every nation, every tongue, every people group, and He's going to make it happen regardless of how faithful Abraham is. Now, he turns the corner. He becomes more and more faithful, but God's still going to work through even his unfaithfulness to accomplish His purposes.
Yeah. Well, there's always complicate consequences to our unfaithfulness, but God overcomes, and that's what this third point's about. God overcomes the complications of mission by breaking through our cloudiness and the world's pride. And this is where you encouraged us to put ourselves in the place of Hagar. This is where you said, the Lord overcomes the cloudiness of His people and the pride of the world. The Lord finds, the Lord hears, the Lord sees. And this is where we see this idea of the pre-incarnate Jesus, the Christophany, for the first time. Let's not miss this. I mean, that is for Jesus to appear to Hagar, right? You say she was running away from the family of promise, and God chased after her. I mean, just think about the results of Hagar and Ishmael and, Islam. I mean, God chased after Hagar. And I had never, it was really emotional for me. I had never allowed myself to have that much compassion towards her.
Yeah.
I'd always seen her as the other one, maybe the enemy. Like there's all of these different emotions that can be wrapped up in it, because we know where it leads, right? But man, in that moment, the love of God just chased after her, and she felt it.
Yeah. Yeah, so one of the things I want to say, and I did not say this in any of the messages because just didn't have time to do it. I did set it up by explaining where Hagar is. God allowed her to fall. So he allowed her to get to a place of actual brokenness. And when you look at where God tends to do the kind of the greatest work, it's typically in those cultures where where the world lives in brokenness, and it's clear that they're in brokenness. It could be economic brokenness, it could be spiritual brokenness and darkness from their kind of spirituality and religious darkness and brokenness. So there's an idea where part of God breaking through the pride is bringing them low. And that's what we see with Hagar. And I did mention that. I did actually mention that on Monday night. The world needs to, at some point, if they could ever get to a place and a reality that their life is where Hagar's was, because if they don't, and they pass and they pass away, I can promise you their next breath will be in that reality. It will be in the reality of Hagar, but they won't have a chance to move from the domain of darkness into the marvelous, beautiful, gracious light of the Lord. But nevertheless, the thing that we see with Hagar is that God allowed her to be driven to a place of brokenness. And that's how He actually broke through her pride and how He overcame the complication that Abraham and Sarah had brought about through their unfaithfulness. But what's also interesting about Hagar is she calls the name of Yahweh. So she gives him a name and doesn't name the place, but names God as the God who sees me. And it really is. This is the first recorded instance of a human responding to an encounter with God by naming him from a lived experience. And again, that is very significant, because the later naming moments, so in Genesis 22, we'll see how Abraham names the place Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. So the important distinction is that Abraham names the place, Hagar names God. Gideon builds an altar, Yahweh Shalom, which means the God of peace. Moses in Exodus 17, Yahweh Nisi, God my banner. But those are altar, those are altar and place names rather than a direct personal name. So these are all the ways that God came through at this place. This is how God came through to her personally. That he is the God who sees me. When no one else sees me, he sees me. And it is powerful. And I mean, here's the thing, Hagar is told to go back to her mistress. So this is fascinating, where even though she's been mistreated, God is saying, hey, I found you. I hear you. I see you. You can go back. And it's almost like, hey, I'm going to care for, I'm going to take care of you. That's significant too, in and of itself, is go back to your mistress. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you always do such a good job of bringing up passages that are seemingly familiar to us, and pulling out just such a different aspect that we hadn't seen before, and that's how this one feels now, with focusing on Hagar and specifically that third point of just God overcoming our complications, and what relief that is for us, especially if we have a sense of feeling of brokenness or overwhelm, or not being competent enough. God can use that, but his will ultimately prevail.
Yeah.
All right. What are any other thoughts or ideas? That's all I had for us today.
Yeah, no, it really is a beautiful passage when you put it in the context of mission of what Abraham and Sarah are supposed to be carrying out. It seems like they failed to carry it out, but God doesn't fail to carry it out.
Right.
And and then with Hagar, there was her worship was born out of suffering. And so if you're in a place of suffering, again, know that God will find you there. God hears your suffering. God sees you in your suffering, and this is something that is actually even going to happen later on in Exodus with God's people, is that He hears them, and He then is going to do something about it. And it wasn't like He was ignoring them. There was a reason for them to spend 400 years in Egypt, because the sin of the Amorites, so this is what we learned last week, the sin of the Amorites is not yet complete, but when their suffering had hit a climactic point, and their crying and their groaning had kind of risen, God heard them, and God remembered, and God came. So this is part of where, man, this is who God is. This is Jesus. He is God. And so He is the God who finds. He finds the one lost sheep that has wandered. He hears. He hears the cries. He sees. So just like the the woman at the well in John 4, when she was wanting to go there so no one would see her, Jesus saw her. And yeah, this is the power, the sovereignty, the grace, the compassion, the kindness. So God is so if Abraham and Sarah is not going to represent him well, he will definitely represent himself well.
Yeah.
So he will be the God who is compassionate and kind and gracious and merciful and all of the above.
Yeah, I mean, that was just such a striking line about this idea of Hagar was running away from the family of promise. And God's like, all right, I'm stepping in.
Yeah. So this is part of where church hurt is a big thing. And so here's, this, so you can think about it, you can think about it this way is God told her to go back to the family of promise. Like, I know they're jacked up. You are too, but listen, it's all about me. So I find you, I hear you, I see you. Go back. And so this is part of where church hurt is a real thing. And I actually mentioned this on Monday night. So maybe you're like Hagar and you've been hurt by church. You've been hurt by the people of God. You've ran away from God. You've ran away from his people. But here's what I would say, and this is what Jesus would say, is go back. go back to, because listen, you need community. You need his community. And they're not perfect. And so that's part of where there has to be a restoration. There has to be a reconciliation that happens. And so now the good news is, and here's what I'm not telling you. I'm not telling you to go directly back to the church that actually wounded you, where because maybe it was atrocious, and so maybe you can forgive them, but reconciliation would be hard and full restoration, because they're not willing to repent, and to be reconciled. But you can find another church. You can give another one of God's churches. You can give them an opportunity to represent and to reflect God will, to be the God who finds and hears and sees. And so this is part of where I think, Hagar goes back. Now we'll see later on, once Isaac comes on the scene, Hagar will be sent out, and but you'll see is that God protects her too, and God's going to provide for her and provide for Ishmael. But nevertheless, in this particular passage that we dealt with today, this past weekend, he tells her to go back. And so I would say maybe you got a friend who has left the church because the church hurt them in some shape, form, or fashion. And really try to encourage them with the story of Hagar, that God, he'll find you, he hears you, and he sees you, but he wants you to go back to his people. He wants you to go back to the people of promise.
Amen.
So with that, Northland family and friends, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Extra Takes. Until next time, blessings.
Thanks for listening to Extra Takes. Be sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you won't miss a single episode.